Hello, this is Ian again with Learning Experiences in Applied Fields. This week we'll be talking about the tools that I use for web development. The one disclaimer is that this video is composed of 10% fact and 90% my opinion, which is a large departure from my normal videos that are 100% cold hard facts. Because this is opinion, some of you will disagree. If you have something constructive to contribute, comment below with your opinion. I'd love to hear it. Now that I have that out of the way, let's get started. Every tool I will discuss today runs on some kind of a computer, so I guess that's where I'll start. Any computer with any operating system can be used for web development. I have used Windows, Linux, and OS X for web development on many different hardware configurations with no problems. You don't need much power for most of what we will do. All that being said, I find myself most often using my MacBook for my web development. This computer is a mid-2014 15-inch Retina MacBook Pro. I tend to work with it docked in a Henge vertical dock connected to a pair of 2K monitors. This setup is way overkill for web development, and it's way more computer than what you need. But if you're wondering what I'm using, that's it. I'm very happy with my setup for the time being, though this might change the next time I need a change or Apple releases another operating system filled with bugs. I'm still a bit bitter. Back on the topic of hardware though, the only part of my setup that I think is truly a big help is the multiple monitor setup. If you have that as an option, it makes it very nice when you can see your code on one screen and keep a browser open on the other. At the end of the day though, it doesn't really matter with Windows switching the way it is today. Don't fret over the hardware. Anything you have will be fine. The most important piece of software involved in web development is the browser. Without a browser, your website is nothing but a pile of text in a file on your desktop. I personally use Google Chrome. I like Chrome for a few reasons. Mostly, it carries settings between computers. I am familiar with it, and the built-in developer tools are awesome. Any browser can be used, but you are best off sticking to one of the standards like Microsoft Internet Explorer, Apple Safari, Mozilla Firefox, or Google Chrome. Others don't always accurately display how your website will display to other people. This can make development a real headache. If you choose to use something other than Chrome, that's fine, but be aware that many of the things I will say in these videos won't directly apply to you without some adaptation. If you haven't ever tried Google Chrome because you've been living under a rock somewhere, I urge you to at least give it a shot. The second most important piece of software is the text editor. This is where you'll actually create your website. This is where you'll spend most of your time. There are many options here, and everybody seems to have their own preferences. I will share some of mine, but understand that anything you choose will work. Some tools might make your life a bit easier, so consider all of your options. My personal first choice at this moment is Sublime Text 3. This is not where I've always been and not what I've always used, but it has been what I've almost exclusively used for a while now. The upside of Sublime Text is that it's flat out awesome. It's cross-platform, it supports tons of plugins, the help community is fantastic, and the interface is simply brilliant. The downside is that it isn't free. There is a free trial version that has no use limit, but it reminds you that it is a trial version every so many saves. For me, because of the amount of time I spend in a text editor, it's worth paying for great software. If you would rather use something free, though, there are plenty of other options. If you're on Windows, look no further than Notepad++. If Notepad++ were available on all operating systems, I probably wouldn't have ever switched to Sublime. Notepad++ is awesome and totally free. On Linux, finding a free option is a bit tougher. There are hundreds of choices, but it seems to be that few are quite as polished as Notepad++ or Sublime. If you do some digging, though, I'm sure you'll find something. And if you happen to be the kind of nerd who refuses to give up your NES because it's the best ever created, there's a program on Linux called VI that you should probably be using. I won't judge that if that happens to be you. On OS X, unfortunately, I haven't been able to find too many free options that I like. This is ultimately why I settled on Sublime. TextMate is one option, though it never felt quite right to me and I could never be at home. I must emphasize, though, before we move on, that you can go with anything here, and anything will work. Even the built-in text editor that comes with every operating system will work. If you're like me, though, you'll come to the conclusion very early on that having active syntax highlighting is really, really nice, and that's where these upper-level text editors come in handy. Now that we have a text editor and a browser, we need a method to connect the two. We need to get our code onto the web server. For that, I use an FTP client. There are other ways to interact with the server, but FTP is the most widely used solution, and that's not without reason. I personally use two tools for this. I use FileZilla if I want a standalone FTP client, or if I'm working on the code directly, I use a Sublime Text plugin called FTP Sync. This plugin automatically uploads the file to the server when you save it. This ability to use plugins is one of the reasons I use Sublime. Notepad++ does have a comparable plugin, and I've used it in the past with great success. It is not always, in fact it's not usually, favorable to do development directly on the server. Often we want to do our development offline locally and then upload the final product to the server. This allows you to make and test changes without having any server downtime. Several factors determine what is needed to accomplish this. I'll divide the situations into two categories for now, simple and complex. Simple in this case means that a website consists of only HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. If this is all your website will use, you can simply place all of the files in the same local folder and navigate to that folder and open your file from your browser. That's it. In complex setups, though, where you're using PHP and/or MySQL, you'll need an offline server that can act like a real server. That offline server replica will execute the PHP scripting and/or interact with the database. Remember from the first video that PHP is server-side scripting, and that's why we need a server. There are many ways to achieve this offline development server. MAMP is one commercialized product designed to do it. I personally prefer a different method, though. I create a virtual machine running a distribution of Linux that is running a full-blown web server in the virtual environment. This requires a bit more setup time in the beginning, but it's well worth it in the end. The advantage of this method is that the development environment can be made to exactly match the real server, so there are no surprises later. The tools I use for this are Parallels Desktop, though VirtualBox works great and it's free. I also use Vagrant and Puppet, which help to get that server up nicely. Links to these are in the description, and I'll have a separate video outlining how to get this whole setup working. For now, we're going to move on. The beauty of web development is that we've already covered everything you need. Actually, setting up each of these pieces of software will be covered in separate videos. The links to each of the programs that I've mentioned so far in this video will be in the description below. Go ahead and install and get comfortable with a browser and a text editor of your choice. Next week, we'll be setting up Sublime and learning our way around it. Don't forget to subscribe, leave comments, and check out leafteam.org if you haven't already. Cheers.